If you only ever rent, it's effectively dead money. You're just a person that's funding somebody else to be in the market.
And this comes with housing unaffordability. It's still running as hot as it was a year or two ago, which is just crazy.
You rent where you want to live, but you own an asset where you can afford.
Does it really necessarily inhibit your wealth building journey?
If you've got enough coin to invest $2 million, buy a cheaper property and get the rest in the stock market. So it's a very strong, easy rent and reasonable growth.
Today we're going to be talking about housing unaffordability. Things are getting more expensive, and that poses the question about rent vesting.
That decision for that short-term gratification of living somewhere cool is costing you massively long-term because you are not in the market. You are not in the market. So that rising tide is not lifting your ship. Hey guys, welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show. A quick announcement, if I may. A staggering 71% of regular listeners to this show aren't actually subscribers. So if you're someone that's ever consumed this content, you found it interesting, useful, or entertaining, hit the subscription button right now and subscribe to this podcast because it will help our business immeasurably in terms of growing the show and getting our reach out there. This week, Mitch and I are talking about rent vesting. It's becoming a new trend and a very, very important one because it gives you the balance of growing assets and still enjoying lifestyle. Much to cover in this. Look forward to seeing you on the show. Hey guys, welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show with me, your host, Andrew Baxter, and as always, my offsider and co-host, Mitch Olarenshaw.
Good to be here, Mr. B. Thanks very much. And real men wear pink, they say, and I think that's true today. Looking sharp.
It's not pink, as they say. It's salmon.
Ooh, very nice.
The classic
Good
story.
save.
The classic story.
Well, hey, let's jump into things today. We're going to be talking about, I guess, a topic that's come up a lot recently, and I say recently, probably the last 5 or 10 years. And this comes with housing unaffordability. It's still running as hot as it was a year or two ago, which is just crazy. Things are getting more expensive, and that poses the question about rent vesting. Is it a smart move here in Australia, or is it not? We're going to flesh it out.
Good stuff. And I think, it's such a hot potato, the notion that people are priced out of the property market and so on and so forth. So what are the solutions? So rent vesting, first of all, what is rent vesting? I guess the easiest definition may not be as precise as some might like, would be you rent where you want to live, but you own an asset where you can afford.
Yep.
Would be the simple explanation. So let's give an example of Sydney. Maybe you've got a predilection that you want to live in the eastern suburbs. So you've got a place in Coogee or Bronte or Bondi or wherever it may be that you rent. And the place you can afford might be in Baxter. And so you own a property there that you rent out, and you rent yourself in the place that you choose to live.
Yep. And I'll add one thing too, just before we kick off. Before anything, owning a property is never a bad idea. So I think regardless of whether you're rent vesting, living in a property, or renting in a property, or whatever it might be, buying an asset such as a property is a great idea. The pros and cons, though, of how it weighs up cost versus benefits wise, I think is really, really the important part here. Why don't we start with the pros of rent vesting? What's the good?
Look, the pros are you are in the property market. Let's just get
that's
that
right. You've got something, right?
You've got an asset, and I think everyone needs somewhere to live, and I feel that as someone that if you own a real asset, you're inflation hedged to an extent, you're susceptible to the market move up or down, as the case may be, but you've got a touch point that you can always come back to. And if push came to shove and your economic circumstance change or your needs change, you potentially can always move back into a property that you own at some point. You might need to work on your tenant moving out, but that's an option that you then have. So you've got an asset rather than not having something that you're working toward. It's the most crucial thing, we talk about it in the book. It is step number one, you have to own a property.
Totally. And I'll add to that as well. I think from a taxation perspective as well, it can offer some really good advantages when it comes to depreciation and that kind of thing. Definitely chat with your accountant on that. Everyone's going to be different, but I think the ability to write things off, depreciation schedule, that can really help. That's
a huge one. And the devil is in the detail always. Owning a property is one thing, and then absolutely optimizing it from an investment perspective is something else. And you're quite right. Getting a depreciation schedule done so you can make your claim every year is one of those things that a lot of people will overlook. And they go, I don't want to have to pay for a depreciation report. I'll just work it out. But it can save you tens of thousands of dollars in terms of things that you can claim to the level that you can, that if you're scrutinized in a tax audit, you can go, well, there's the report from my expert that did the depreciation report. So their opinion's pretty solid.
Yep. And I'll make an admission here before we go any further. I actually did rent vest to a degree, at least in the start of my career. I bought an investment property and then rented at home or bought it at home. So I took the same approach.
I'll love that story. Like you boarding at home now. Your mother is Italian, Sue, lovely lady, and you are her only son, her eldest child, the apple of her eye. So I can imagine the peppercorn sweetheart deal that you were on. And I bet you she gave you the cash back in kind in some way, shape, or form as well.
No, she kept it. It was all contributions. But my board was pretty hefty back then. So
I'll turn it up. I'm almost feeling sorry for you. But no, smart strategy. You've got that toe in the market, and you know, again, it's easy to find excuses, and yes, the property market for a lot of people is an insurmountable mountain to climb. If you look at the other side of the coin, in terms of the pros and cons of rentvesting, so you've got an asset and it's in a place that you can afford to get into. So you've got your start. So instead of an excuse, you've got an asset. Secondly, it's probably more affordable. So the financial duress that goes alongside that is lower than if you'd overstretch yourself. Now, the other side of the coin is if you're choosing to rent somewhere, and chances are you're going to rent where you want to live, that maybe has a few more bells and whistles in terms of your desire. So it might meet your social life, for example. It might meet the fact that you enjoy surfing and you want to be near the beach. You're going to pay a premium for those facilities. And that means a premium as a buyer or owner of those properties. And you're also going to pay a smaller premium as a renter in those spaces. But it makes it much, much more cost effective to rent in somewhere like that than it does to own somewhere like that, because the jack up in premium that you're paying for beachside to buy versus the smaller amount, relatively speaking, it is to rent. Property yield at the moment, for residential property might be 3.5, maybe 4 on a good day, but probably gross. And by the time you take out the various expenses there, so you're paying 3.5%. Effectively of that property in terms of your costs. I'm not explaining that too well. Let's try that in a different way. So if property costs $2 million and you're renting it for $1,200 a week, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, as I said, it's a pretty good deal, that one.
Whereas if you have to proffer up the $2 million to buy it, it's a very, very expensive asset. It's earning you 3 and a bit percent. If you've got enough coin to invest $2 million in something like that, buy a cheaper property and get the rest in the stock market.
Yeah, I guess that poses a question that I'd like to ask you. I mean, does it really necessarily inhibit your wealth building journey? So you say you want to live near the beach, $2 million property, you're paying your $1,200 or $1,500 a week in rent, that's fine. You could still be buying 5, 10, 20 properties in various suburbs that aren't as expensive over time, which would help you building your wealth over time. So, I mean, as you say, the actual dollar cost coming out of your pocket every single week is likely going to be less. Doesn't mean it necessarily has to inhibit the other side of the ledger.
No, it's strange. Everyone's got their different route into life. One of my former colleagues, he used to insist on renting waterfront mansions, and he reckoned it's the best deal ever because the rent was relatively low compared to the purchase price, and he could use the cash in other ways that he felt that there was a way to grow. Obviously, if you're in a suburb that's running hard, you miss out on that growth. That's the opportunity cost of renting versus buying. But a rising tide typically lifts all ships, and if you own property in a different suburb in the same city, it's probably going to move up in a not dissimilar way anyway.
Okay, so let's go through expenses, because owning properties can be quite expensive, regardless of wherever you buy a property. For example, I have a principal place of residence. I've also got an investment property. I could certainly say firsthand, I'm very, very happy to pay my own water bill. I'm happy to pay my own rates. When it comes to paying my tenants' rates and my tenants' water bill, that is slightly harder to part with. So you have to be in mind, if you're going to own an investment property, it's still going to cost you money for those kinds of things.
It does. Utilities. So, for example, water and rates are typically the landlord's responsibility. Obviously, things like electricity is on consumption. Gas would be the same. If it's in a strata title building, then you've got things like body corporate, which again is the landlord that you're on the hook for. You've got land tax potentially, which it can, depending on the nature of the property, may or may not affect you. There's you've mentioned council rates in there, landlord insurance.
It's expensive.
It does actually add up to be a reasonable amount. And again, the difference between buying somewhere as an investment property and somewhere that you want to live in, and I've gone through this sort of conversation with my wife fairly recently. We've been engaged in a couple of transactions, one of which is in Brisbane. It's in a suburb I particularly like, and my wife feels I've got this emotional reason for wanting to be there. It's a blue chip suburb, and I've got reasons for it because I feel it's always going to be one of those areas that's a very strong, easy rent and reasonable growth. The challenge, though, is if you go into a complex, for example, where there are great amenities, they go, oh, it's really good. It's got, and the agent's saying to look, it's got a pool, it's got a gym, gym, it's got this, it's got that. And you think, that's great. But as the landlord, their facilities I'm paying for, but I'm never going to use.
That's it. You got to pay the body corp.
It's because it's going to fall to me to do this. There's multiple lifts in the place, which means that the body corporate is there's always someone servicing a lift because always something goes wrong. All those sorts of things. So having something that's sort of stripped back. And I'm not talking about living in an East Germany 1950s concrete monolithic, very brutalist architecture, square box. But at the same time, all of those bells and whistles, while they look good, they don't necessarily result in a higher level of rent, which is really what it boils down to at the end of the day. It is simply the yield, which is take the rent you're getting each week, times it by 52, and divide the property value by that number. That's your yield. And ultimately, that's what you're looking to optimize as a landlord.
There's one thing you mentioned in there was the word tax. I want to explore this a little bit further if we can. If we look at, say, for example, buying a property that you live in as your principal place of residence, that's typically going to be tax-free when you go to sell it one day. If it's an investment property, unfortunately, it's going to be subject to CGT. Now, structuring may change that slightly if you're an individual or a company or whatever it might be. What are your thoughts there on cost benefits, paying the tax, maybe not? Because that's a big question. That could add up to a lot, particularly how hard property values have run.
There's no right or wrong answer to this because it's something that's unique to everybody, and you can go down multiple routes with regard to structuring. If your overarching goal or desire is to optimize tax, which is one lens to look through, then obviously, yes, there are certain structures that are going to be more advantageous to you to pursue. And again, that's your accountant and advisor's job to guide you through that. But that's not the only lens. So if you're in a different position whereby maybe asset protection is more important to you, then the type of structuring that you're going to use is going to be driven by that asset protection lens that you're looking through instead. And why is asset protection so important? Look, let's just say for argument's sake, you're self-employed. You're not an employee, you're self-employed, or you have a business of some sort, and something goes wrong with that business and your assets are all held in your name and you're pursued legally in your name. There's a very good chance all of your assets that you own become collateral against the debts that you've incurred in that particular area if you're being pursued. As an example, if they're held in other structures, and this is not totally impervious, there's always risk associated with all kinds of advice, but if they're held in other structures, they're at arm's length and therefore may not be necessarily your asset if they're held in a trust. They belong to the trust and are the beneficiaries and trustees of that. So, if you're looking through an asset protection lens, it can be a little bit different. You might go, well, I don't see that I'm someone that's exposed to risk because I'm employed. What if you're a surgeon? What if you're an anaesthetist? Well, something could go wrong, malpractice suit, you might have professional indemnity cover, but there are things that can come your way. What about if you play golf? And you are as bad at golf as I am, and you slice one and the ball hits someone on the head, they sue you. So and we live in an extremely litigious world. So, whilst tax efficiency is such an important thing, I think that structuring side from asset protection is just, if not more important to look through. So it may not be optimized from a tax perspective, but you may be more optimized from an asset protection perspective. So
as I said, would your advice be for anyone wanting to potentially look down the pathway of Rentvesting to get that advice regardless on 100%.
It's always better to do that before than after the fact, because if you go, look, I've got 2-3 properties and I realize that I'm in the wrong structure, to move them into a new structure is going to hit you with a whole swag of stamp duty, which is not going to be very palatable for the sake of not getting the advice early. So build the structure first and put the assets in the right part of that.
Yep. That's an interesting thing. So you say stamp duty, probably the next couple of things that come to my mind.
History on stamp duty?
Sorry?
So stamp duty, everyone's big bugbear. It's terrible. What is it, 3% in most places?
Yeah,
thereabouts?
it's too much.
Yeah, I've just done a transaction in Italy. It's 9%.
Oh, first world problems.
It's a stinker. It is. That's 9% stamp duty.
Ouch.
But then there's no capital gains tax after 5 years over there. Okay. So there's always different.
Yin and yang. So if we look at, say, buying a property as an investment or as a principal place of residence, the incentives aside from tax, like stamp duty, like government grants, can be very, very different. An investment property, really, you're not going to get any incentive from anywhere to buy it. You need probably likely 20% deposit, and then the bank will give you the loan. If it's a principal place of residence, on the other hand, chances are you could probably get away with a smaller deposit, so lower barrier to entry. You might get a grant, a government grant, depending on if it's a new build or not and where it is. That's a big decision to weigh up.
They are important decisions. Again, it comes down to what your objective is. What's your reason for wanting to be in the property market? And it's only probably in the last couple of decades, last decade and a half, that the lens for property, I think, has really changed from somewhere to live to somewhere to make money from.
Yeah.
You look at TV shows. Look at The Block as an example of that. Everyone's renovation nightmare. Imagine spending 6 months renovating something and getting filmed through the stress of doing all of it.
It looks
and
horrible,
not making a
doesn't
cracker
it?
at the end of it and go, how's this fair? Well, that's called life.
Yeah.
It's just like, and so all of these type of shows have put a real sort of spotlight on the fact that this is the way to make great money. And if it is in your own name, obviously it's tax-free. There's very few things in Australia that are tax-free. That is one way of doing it. And I think everyone's circumstances are different. If you've the ability to get government assistance in buying something, I don't necessarily agree with government assistance, but if it's there, play to the rule book that's there, take
Totally.
it, use it as an opportunity to give you that tailwind that you can get access to. There's no issue with that.
Yeah.
And if that's what you need to get started, I'm not sure, actually. I'll be interested to get some clarification. Maybe someone in the comments could help this. How long does it have to be your primary place of residence before you can convert it into investment?
Oh, I don't know. That'd be a good one. We'll have to flesh that out. Good question.
So you might be able to buy somewhere, get all the assistance you need, and after whatever that period might be, 2, 3, 5 years, if there's a number on it,
You can convert
and
it.
move that into your first investment property and then go again.
Interesting. Okay. In regards to renting, if you are rent vesting, I know there's now legislation with landlords, because I've looked into it as a landlord, of course, as to how much you can raise the rent every year. So I think if you're rent vesting, your property value might be going up by X, but the rent that you're paying might only be going up by Y, which is likely going to be a far smaller amount, at least in these current market conditions. To my mind, that probably gives you somewhat of a comparative advantage.
Yeah, look, it's those two correlations should be the same. I mean, if a property goes up by 10%,
The rent goes, yeah.
then the rent can go up. But the reality is people can't afford a jump in rent like that.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. So, the notion of it capping affects it really does distort the yield that you could potentially look at on something. And it also, I guess, disrupts the market in some ways too, which most government policies are pretty good at doing the equal and opposite. You've got capped rent, so you can stay here, but the landlord at 12 months can go, no, we're done because I need you out so that I can put somebody else in at a significantly higher rate.
That's it.
Which is your right to do as a landlord, of course. But
then you got to go and find somewhere else to live. Could be more expensive. I think that's probably the trap. I mean, I think with the way that the world works at the moment, very social media driven, status, it's very easy to over rent. And what I mean by that is go and rent somewhere in a suburb or a place that maybe overextend you, where you're going to be paying too much just to live in the location that you want. I think that's a real risk.
It is, but it also gives you, it's like, if you had the choice of having a sports car for a week rather than owning it outright, that also gives you a sample of what that lifestyle may be like with a limited outlay. And so, you can get the experience for 6 months or 12 months if you want to have, a little bit more color in your life, for example.
I know where this is going.
And then at the end of that time frame, you come back into the lane that you were in, but you can say, well, that was a fun chapter of my life and I was prepared to pay a little bit extra for that. So I mean, everyone's got their own choice. They're on their own journey. They can do as they see fit. The key things out of this, you go back to the big broad strokes. Number one, own somewhere.
Yep.
If you rent after you own somewhere, that's fine. But if you only ever rent, it's effectively dead money because you're never in the market. You're just a person that's funding somebody else to be in the market. So you've got to own. That's why rentvesting makes a lot of sense. You've got an underlying asset. In terms of what you go through to rentvest, the granular stuff, what entity, what suburb, how you arbitrage it between what it's costing you to own somewhere and what's costing. Well, hopefully it's cash flow positive in what you own. You want something that's got a positive line. And then whatever that extra cash flow that's popping out of that, you can do one of two things. One would be to cross-subsidize where you're living, that you're paying more for, which means you're living somewhere at an okay budget, but the revenue from your investment property is helping subsidize that, which can be a bit of a red herring, because in my mind, I think if you reinvest that in the property you own and get the debt down on there. Ultimately, you're going to have a bigger amount of equity in that investment property, which you could potentially use for additional collateral for another deal, or reducing your mortgage payments to ultimately own that property, on an unencumbered basis. Also, if you're subsidizing that blowout and cost that you've got for living on the beach, you're getting yourself a false sense of security of what it's actually costing you. It's an opportunity cost of what it's costing you as well. And maybe that tax of paying an extra $300 or $400 a week rent living at the beach, after 6 or 12 months, you might get fed up with that and pull your head in and move into a different chapter, which long term is probably better for you financially too. Sound like the fun police. I mean, I've done all this stuff. It's good fun.
I was going to say, well, so what's your thoughts? Would you Rentvest if you had your time over again? And let's assume that your position wasn't as fortunate as what it was. If you were just sort of at that sort of middle class,
I think I probably would.
You would,
and because it gives you an opportunity to do something that's like plenty of colour, I suppose, without being wedded to it long term. So I think there is an argument for that. I guess I've been more conservative in what I've done with my investing over time. But that just happens to be, the pathway that I've been on. But the key thing, going back to it one more time, just in case anyone's a slow learner that's listening to this, you have to own.
Yep.
You have to have a horse in the race. That's the most important thing. After that, it's a secondary consideration as to what you do. But if you've made that effort to get in the game, where you've earned the ability to have a little bit of latitude in your decision making, if you're not in the game in terms of owning and you're still choosing to splurge on living somewhere that's more than what it should be in terms of lavishness or locale or whatever it may be, that decision for that short-term gratification of living somewhere cool is costing you massively long-term, because you are not in the market. You are not in the market. So that rising tide is not lifting your ship.
Indeed. Great advice, AB. Thank you very much for the chat today.
My pleasure, anytime. There you go, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Most importantly, hit the notification button, and we'll look forward to hosting you next week.